Sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Now, one of the major adaptations of higher plants to live on land is sexual reproduction, through which seeds and fruits develop. These structures, that is, the seeds and the fruits, nourish, protect the embryo, and also aids in its dispersal. The organ used for sexual reproduction in flowering plants is the flower. So, in this section, we look at the structure of the flower and its function. Now, in this diagram here, we have a longitudinal section of a typical flower. Now, a typical flower has the following features. One, there is a pedicel, or the flower stalk, which attaches the flower to the stem. That is, the pedicel attaches the flower to the stem of the plant. In most plants, each flower is borne on its own stalk, and such a flower is therefore said to be solitary. So a solitary flower is one that is borne on its own stalk. In other plants, however, several flowers are borne on a single common stalk, forming a cluster known as an inflorescence. So an inflorescence refers to a cluster of several flowers that share a common stalk. So a flower may either be solitary, or the flowers may occur in clusters that are known as an inflorescence. Flowers that have a pedicel attaching them to the stem are said to be pedicellate. Okay, while those that lack a pedicel, they are said to be apedicellate. That is, they are those flowers that appear as though they are attached directly to the stem. So such flowers are said to be apedicellate. Then another part of the flower is the receptacle. The receptacle is this swollen part, the swollen upper part of the pedicel, onto which the other floral parts are attached. Now, so we have the pedicel, and the upper part, the upper solid part of the pedicel is the receptacle. Now, a typical flower has 4 distinct rings. If you had to cut a transverse section like that across the flower, then we will see that there are 4 rings that make up the flower, so as shown in this transverse section. There's the outer ring known as the calyx, is made up of sepals. Then the corolla, made up of the petals. So these are the sepals that make up the calyx. Then the corolla, that is made up of petals. So this is a petal. The petal makes up the corolla, the second ring. Then the third ring is known as androecium, that consists of stamens. So these stamens make up the androecium. Then at the center, there is a gynoecium that consists of the carpel. So we look at each ring one by one, describe the features and the function. Starting with the outermost, that is the calyx. It is made up of several sepals. The sepals are often green in color, though they may have other colors. Now, when these sepals are fused, then the calyx is said to be known as a gemosepalous. That is, when the sepals that make up the calyx are fused. On the other hand, when these sepals are unfused, they are free, then the calyx is said to be polysepalous. Okay, so the calyx may be gemosepalous, made up of fused sepals, or polysepalous, where the sepals are free or unfused. The function of the calyx is that it protects the inner parts of the flower, especially during the bud development stage. Next is the corolla. So this is the corolla, is made up of petals. The corolla is made up of several petals. The petals are often brightly colored in many flowers. Now, when the petals are free, the corolla is said to be polypetalous. That is, when the petals are free. But when the petals are fused as to form a tubular structure, then the corolla is said to be gemopetalous. That is made up of fused petals. The function of the corolla in the flower is that it acts as an attractant to pollinators such as insects and birds. It also protects the inner androecium and the gynoecium parts of the flower. Then the next ring is known as the androecium. The androecium is the male part of the flower. It consists of several stamens. Each stamen is made up of a stalk known as a filament, which bears the anther at the tip. So a stamen consists of the filament, which is a stalk, that bears the anthers at the tip. Each anther has two lobes in which the pollen sacs, where pollen grains are produced. That is, each anther has two lobes, which in turn bears the pollen sacs. It is in these pollen sacs where the pollen grains are formed. The function of the stamens, that is the androecium, is the production of pollen grains. Now, pollen grains are structures that bear the male gametes of the flower. Then at the center of the flower, there is the gynoecium. Gynoecium is the female part of the flower. It consists of one or more carpels. So this is the gynoecium at the center. It's known as the carpel. Each carpel is made up of three parts: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The stigma receives the pollen grains from the anthers. The stigma also provides the surface for the germination of pollen grain. So the pollen grains land on this stigma. It is here that the pollen grains will germinate. The style, on the other hand, supports the stigma in the best position for pollination. That is the style. It also provides passage for the developing pollen tube and also nutrients that enables the pollen tube to develop and thereby convey the male gametes to the ovary. The ovary, on the other hand, contains one or more ovules. The ovules later develop into seeds. The ovary also develops into the fruit. Later on, it is the walls of the ovary that develops into the fruit. So in transverse section, you can see the four rings: the outer calyx, the corolla, the endoecium, and the gynoecium at the center. Now, there are different types of gynoecium depending on the type of the flower. So the categorization of the different types of the gynoecium can be based on the number of carpels that make up the gynoecium. Accordingly, there are three types of gynoecium. The first one is known as monocarpous gynoecium. In this type of gynoecium, there's only one carpel. And in a typical flower, it will look like this. Here, that's the one carpel that make up the flower. So, because of the presence of just one carpel, the gynoecium is known as monocarpous. Then there are the polycarpous gynoecium, for which there are two types. Polycarpous gynoecium is one in which there is more than one carpel present. The carpels present may be free, that is unfused. Like in this particular case, there are two carpels that are free or unfused. Such a polycarpous gynoecium is said to be apocarpous. And this is how it looks like in a typical flower. You have several carpels in this particular flower. The other type of polycarpous gynoecium is known as the syncarpous. In syncarpous gynoecium, the carpels that are present are fused. So you have fused carpels, and this is how they look like in a typical flower. They're so fused that it's only the stigma here that can tell, that can show or indicate that there are several carpels that make up this gynoecium. So where the carpels are several and fused, the gynoecium is said to be syncarpous. Now, flowers do differ based on their floral structures. So we look at variations of the floral structures and the different types of flowers that result. These variations are based on different features, which may include: one, position of the ovary in relation to other floral parts. According to these features, there are three types of flowers. Epigynous flower. This is one in which the ovary is located on the receptacle such that the other floral parts are above it. So here, this is the ovary. It is on the receptacle, and the rest of the floral parts, that is the sepal, the petals, and the stamens, arise at a point on the receptacle above the ovary. Such a flower is said to be a epigynous flower. And because the ovary is located below the point from which the other floral parts arise, this ovary is said to be inferior. So in an epigynous flower, the ovary is inferior because the rest of the floral parts arise from a point above it on the receptacle. Related to that, is the hypogynous flower. In hypogynous flower, the ovary is above the other floral parts on the receptacle. So here, that is the ovary. And as you can see on the receptacle, the ovary is above the other floral parts. That is the hypogynous flower. And because the ovary is above other floral parts on the receptacle, the ovary is said to be superior. The third type is a perigynous flower, in which the receptacle is cup-shaped such that the ovary appears to be half inferior. Part of it is below the points of origin of the other floral parts, and part of the ovary is above. So it appears as though the other floral parts emerge from the surroundings of the ovary. Such a flower is said to be perigynous flower. Now, another feature of variation is based on the number of rings or holes present. A flower that has all the 4 rings, namely the calyx, the corolla, the endoecium and gynoecium, is said to be a complete flower or perfect flower. Such a flower is also termed as bisexual or hermaphroditic because it has both the male part, that is the stamen, and the female part, that is the carpel. So the carpel is the male part, while the female part, while the male part consists of the stamen. So such a flower is hermaphroditic, and it is represented by this sign of the hermaphrodite. So most flowers in nature are complete flowers, and they are thus hermaphroditic. And then you have the incomplete flower. These are the imperfect flowers. And an imperfect flower is one that lacks one or more of the floral rings. There are those that lack corolla and calyx. Instead, they have bract-like structures to cover the male part and the female part, as is common in many grasses. Many grasses don't have corolla and calyx. Instead, they have these bracts. This is to expose the anthers and the stigma to wind, which is the main pollinating agent. Another type of imperfect flower or incomplete flower is one that lacks either the gynoecium or endoecium. Such a flower is said to be unisexual. Accordingly, there are 2 types of unisexual flowers. One is a staminate flower, represented by this sign. A staminate flower lacks the female part, that is, it lacks the carpel. Only the endoecium is present. Therefore, it's only the stamen that are present in such a flower. Such a flower is said to be staminate, that is, male flower, since it only has the male part. Then on the other hand, there are those flowers that lack the male part and instead have only the female part or the carpel. Such flowers are said to be capillate or pistillate flower, and this is their symbol. So in such a flower, it's only the carpel that is present. And because of that, such flowers are said to be female. They are female flowers, hence this sign. Now, there are 2 types of plants that have unisexual flowers. 2 types of plants with unisexual flowers. Most plants have hermaphroditic flowers, but those that have unisexual flowers come in 2 forms. The first one is a monoecious plant. In monoecious plants, there are distinct male and female flowers, but they both occur on the same plant. So this flower has both the male, that is this plant, not the flower, the male flower and the female flower occur on the same plant, hence the term monoecious plants. The flowers are unisexual, but the male and the female flowers occur on the same plant. A good example of such a plant is the maize. The maize plant is monoecious, which means it has both the male flower, that is the staminate, and the female flower, that is the capillate, on the same plant. Other examples of plants that are monoecious is the cedar plant and the fir tree. The cedar and the fir trees, these are monoecious plants. The other type of plants that have unisexual flowers is the dioecious plants. Dioecious plants have the staminates and pistillates on different plants. Accordingly, these plants do have distinct male types and distinct female. The male plants have only the staminate flowers, while the female plants have only the capillate flowers, which means that we have the male plant that produces the pollen grains but cannot form the fruits and seeds therefore, and you also have the female plant that produces the female flower and does produce the fruits and the seeds. So plants such as you have the pawpaw plant and the ash tree are dioecious plants. The male plant will flower because it forms the staminates, but such plants will never produce fruits because fruits cannot develop in the staminate, because fruits develop from the ovary and staminate flowers do not have the ovary.